Good morning, everybody. I'm Alfred Schipke, the director of the East Asian Institute, and it's a real pleasure for me today to welcome Dr. Yu Yongding to give a presentation on a topic that, for those who look at China, and I think it's pretty much everybody in the world, for whatever reason, is wondering whether China can reach its growth target in 2024. Dr. Yu Yongding is a scholar of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and a member of the Advisory Committee of National Planning of the National Development Reform Committee of the People's Republic of China. He served as the Director General of the Institute of World Economics and Politics. He was a member of the Monetary Policy Committee at the People's Bank of China, graduated from the Beijing School of Science and Technology, received a master's from the Graduate School of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and obtained his PhD in economics from Oxford University. But I think for those who know him well, he's truly somebody that can bridge the world in China. He has, of course, looked at the global economy throughout his entire life. And what he's done very effectively throughout the years that I've known him is to try to explain how China operates. So basically a spokesperson to explain the dynamics. But he's always done, as a scholar, as an academic, being critical where he had to be critical, and being supportive where he had to be supportive. I think the sad thing these days is there are too few of them that can bridge that divide, that can facilitate a dialogue. And when I say help a dialogue, it's not only the language, it is that each system, of course, has its own priors and ways of looking at it, and the dialogue has been diminishing. So we're very glad that you're with us today. We're very much looking forward to your presentation. Let me just highlight, this is an in-person event, but it will be taped and will be made available on our web page. You'll, of course, have ample of time later on to ask questions, and I'm sure there will be many already up front. Please state your name and affiliation. But with that, and without any further ado, Dr. Yu Yongding, we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Alfred's kind introduction. I have been visiting this institute for many times, and I stay here for more than 1 month, and to have the opportunity to exchange views with the research fellows. I hope this time I still have the opportunity. I have to say that I'm sad that this time I will not be able to see John Wang. We were old friends for 40 years something, starting from later 70s and early 80s. He helped Chinese scholars abroad. We appreciate his help very much. So I hope I can utilize this opportunity to express my appreciation, gratitude to John Wang. And now I will say something about the Chinese economy. I'm going to talk about a few important controversial issues. I have to make a statement that my view is perhaps still a minority view, representing only my own views on some important issues in China. And so I hope after my presentation, you can raise questions and criticize my views, and I will be very happy to utilize this opportunity to exchange views with you, to learn from you. So the first question I want to talk about is the causes of the slowdown of the Chinese economy. Chinese economy has been slowing down since 2010. Actually, in the first quarter of 2010, China's growth rate is 12.2%. extremely high. But since then, China's growth rate has been slowing down on a yearly basis, even on a quarterly basis. So this is something very strange. Here's some very simple figures. The only exception case is in 2008 and 2006 and 2016 and 2018. There's some reverse. But beside these two years, each quarter, China's growth rate will be lower than last quarter. That's something very strange. So people will ask, what's the fundamental cause of this kind of slowing down? Many people argue that this is because something fundamental happened in China. Hence, the slowing down is inevitable. People raise many points. For example, lack of progress in reforms, aging, increasing in environmental cost, losing later-comer advantages, rise of other emerging economies, diminishing return to scale, and so on and so forth. So the conclusion is that following the passage of time, it will be increasingly more difficult for China to maintain a high growth rate. I think most people will agree with these comments. Actually, this is quoted from my own paper, which was wrote in 1998. But you know, after that period of time, China entered into a very high growth period. Average growth rate is more than 10%. And you also, I think you remember, there's a very famous book, bestseller, by a guy called Gordon Zhang. He published a book in 2001 saying that there's an imminent crash of Chinese economy. But after he published the book, China's growth rate shot up. What I'm trying to say that there's a methodological problem. You analyze China's economic progress, China's economic problem. Yes, I mean, I just mentioned that factors, those are long-term factors, slow variables, which will have an impact on the growth of Chinese economy. But we don't know when the growth of Chinese economy will start to slow down. We don't know to what level it will slow down to 8%, to 7%, to 6%, to 5%, or even lower. Nobody knows. So you just cannot use those long-term slow variables to explain China's yearly, even quarterly change of its economic growth. This is a very important methodological problem. So in order to analyze, to find the causes of Chinese economic slowing down, you need to follow the history year by year. If you have time, even quarter by quarter, to see what happened, what are the direct causes which lead to the slowdown of China's growth rate at that particular period. Then you can make some generalization, then you may draw useful conclusions. So what I'm trying to say is that long-term and slow variables such as aging cannot explain China's short and mid-term economic growth. While admitting the adverse effect of these long-term and slow variables on China's growth of GDP, I think that's very important. China's persistent and steady slowdown since 2010, to a large extent, is policy-induced. Okay, policy-induced. So you have to analyze what policy is wrong during particular time. Give one example. People tend like to use aging as a factor to explain China's slowing down. From this chart, you can find that working age population actually are quite changeable in short period of time. In the long run, of course, working population will fall. The number of working population will fall. But in short and medium time, working population actually are variable. In some years, the working population is bigger than another year. But as I mentioned, since 2010, China's GDP growth has been falling steadily. Here example, for example, in 2010, working population, the number is 784 million. And in 2015, it's 800 million. But in 2015, China's growth rate is significantly lower than 2010. So you cannot use working population to explain why during this period of time, China's growth rate has fallen. So if you want to analyze, what I'm trying to emphasize is that the diagnosis of the direct cause of China's quarterly and yearly steady decline in GDP must be based on historical analysis of our policy changes, and then ask why there are such changes. Then you may find some more fundamental, more basic causes behind those yearly changes. The thing is that after breakout the global financial crisis, Chinese government has introduced a 4 trillion yuan stimulus plan. As a result, China's economy rebounded very quickly. I think that is a very important turning point in recent China's economic growth. By and large, this plan is successful, but it also creates many side effects, such as inflation, real estate bubble, a significant increase in leverage ratio, waste of resource, and so on and so forth. That's true. This 4 trillion plan is successful, basically, but it creates lots of side effect. Here is the example. After this 4 trillion stimulus package, China's inflation rise and quite significantly, and also housing bubble also become more serious after introduction of this 4 trillion stimulus package. What I'm trying to say, there are some side effects. As a result, I think government make mistake because they emphasize too much on this side effect. The government withdraw the expansionary monetary policy and fiscal policy since 2010, and tightened the macroeconomic policy in 2011, especially in 2011. From this chart, you can see that China's budget deficit to GDP ratio fall from 2.8% to 1.1%. Compared with the United States and many other countries, they introduce expansionary fiscal policy. They increase the budget deficit to GDP ratio continuously, but China withdrawn the policy very quickly. And also, you can see China's monetary policy. In 2009, the increase in credit is 9.6 trillion RMB, 9.6 trillion RMB. But in 2011, it becomes 7.5 trillion, fall dramatically. You can feel the impact of this early withdrawal from expansionary monetary fiscal policy. You can feel the impact of these policy changes. Actually, in 2009, it's difficult for Chinese commercial banks to persuade entrepreneurs to accept loans because those entrepreneurs see the future is not that bright. They don't want to accept. But the People's Bank of China tries best to persuade those entrepreneurs to accept those credit. But only after 2 years, you shift your policy direction. So the shock, the impact on those entrepreneurs actually quite big. It's sort of interruption. Well, I'm trying to say that Chinese government shouldn't withdraw from its expansionary monetary and fiscal policy so quickly. It's caused huge problem. More importantly, since 2012, China's basic situation has changed. And inflation, I mean, as I just mentioned, in 2011, inflation is a little bit high. It's something like 5.6% a year. So in 2011, it's rational for Chinese government to be cautious, to adjust its monetary and fiscal policy. But they fail to recognize that since 2012, China's macroeconomic situation has changed quite fundamentally. Since March of 2012, China's PPI has entered into negative territory for 54 months, PPI negative, and CPI fell below 3% since May of 2012. Since then, China's inflation rate has been very low on the whole. So I can say that since then, China's problem is deflation. We should worry about deflation. While inflation rate very low, even negative, China's growth rate has been falling steadily. So facing this kind of position, you should use expansionary fiscal and monetary policy without hesitation. In this regard, China should learn from the United States and many other countries. Why China make adjustment? Why they are so cautious? A very direct reason is in 2012, housing price has been rise. It's quite significant according to this charter. I quote this from Schipke. And in 2012, government once planned to stimulate the growth with the approval of a basket of infrastructure projects worth something like 7 million. As I mentioned, in 2012, growth rate has been 4. So once Chinese government tried to reintroduce expansionary fiscal and monetary policy, but they hesitated because the rising in housing prices. So perhaps you remember, in later 2012, lots of investment banks make a prediction about the future growth rate of a Chinese economy in 2013. Most of those prediction is more than 8%. I remember HBC predict that in 2013, China's growth rate will be 8.6%. My institute also did a prediction. Our prediction is more than 8%. But because this kind of a rising in housing prices, certainly Chinese government changing its policy again and from expansionary to contractory. So the performance of China's growth rate in 2012 was a disappointment. So why Chinese government are so cautious? Whenever they see some sign of instability, they tighten their monetary and fiscal policy. Why? I think one of their very important cause is they fail to recognize China has quite larger policy space, both in terms of fiscal and monetary policy. China's fiscal position in comparison with other countries. Most commentators will argue that China's fiscal position is not that good because China has very high local government debts, plus some other contingent liabilities. China's fiscal position is not that good. Yes, there are some problems, but you compare with other countries, China's fiscal position is still good. Even use the definition of augmented fiscal deficit, China's fiscal position is okay compared with other countries. I think why we admit there's some problems, but you should see China's fiscal position is still good. You should not worry too much about the China's fiscal position. You should worry about the continuous slowing down of the growth rate. Actually, we learned this story in later 90s and early 2000. During that period of time, China suffered from non-performing loans. At the time, we calculate China's contingent liabilities, add contingent liabilities together, we have a conclusion that China's physical position is not that good. But at the same time, Chinese government was bold enough to still insist on using expansionary fiscal policy so that the China's growth rate shoot up. As a result, as the result of strong economic growth, the leverage ratio instead increasing actually fall. By using expansionary fiscal policy, you spend more, you promote economic growth. So on the whole, the leverage ratio has been falling. So this is the analysis we did in later 90s and early 2000s. But unfortunately, after Asian financial crisis, I think the Chinese government seems to forget the importance of a growth rate compared with the accumulation of government debt. And this is the European situation. We say in China, Greece and Spain, Italy, and Ireland, they suffer greatly during their sovereign debt crisis. The one thing is that without very high interest rate, nobody want to buy their government bonds. So that's their problem. Nobody want to buy their government bonds. But this situation is not true in China. People want to buy government bonds. The interest rate is low. So because the low interest rate, you should not fear too much about issuing more bonds. I think this is one very serious problem. During that period of time, lots of people will argue that Chinese enterprises leverage ratio is too high, higher than United States. Yes, that is true. But if you see the whole capital market, you'll find why Chinese corporates leverage ratio is very high, because China's stock exchange is underdeveloped. Here you can see the valuation of a stock exchange over GDP ratio in China is something like 65% in 2022, just 65%. In United States, it's 162%. So in US, enterprises rely on stock exchanges. In China, because overbanking and this sort of thing, underdeveloped under stock exchanges, corporates has to rely on borrowing from commercial banks. So in terms of a reliance of external finance, China's situation is not worse than the United States. So for China, the problem, the challenge is that you have tried to develop your stock exchanges. You should lower the overbanking phenomenon in China. Actually, Chinese are not very successful in this regard. Until now, China's stock exchange is highly speculative. Really, corporates cannot rely on raising funds from stock exchanges. This is China's problem. And so China should not really worry too much about the so-called very high leverage ratio of corporates. And at the same time, people will argue that because China's extensive fiscal and monetary policy, efficiency in investment in financing China's enterprises is very low. Yes, it's low, but if you compare with many other countries, it's not that low. China needs to make improvement in all these kind of fronts, but this sort of problem should not prevent the Chinese government from using expansionary fiscal and monetary policy to stimulate the economy. Another very important issue is overcapacity. And since 2012, people try its best to argue that China now is suffering from overcapacity. This also Chinese government's view. If you check the so-called work reports each year by Chinese government, you'll find they always emphasize the importance of cut overcapacity. But in my view, overcapacity is not a macroeconomic phenomenon. At the macroeconomic level, there isn't overcapacity. The problem is whether you have a sufficient aggregate demand. After Keynes, I think at the macroeconomic level, the problem is whether your aggregate demand is high enough. If aggregate demand is too high, then there will be inflation. If aggregate demand is too low, then there's deflation. I think that's quite easy. So if you talk about overcapacity, you should concentrate on sector problem. For example, there's overcapacity, say in iron steel industry, serious overcapacity, especially in 2012. The profit selling 1 ton steel, the profit is lower than selling lollipop, very, very low. But why this is the problem? Because the overall economic situation is not that good. Aggregate demand has been falling, so they cannot sell their products. So overcapacity is a sectorial problem. Overcapacity should be solved by market. If there's overcapacity in particular products, the price will fall. Then the enterprise will reduce their production. Then perhaps there's undercapacity. Then price will rise again. You can see that kind of fluctuation. It's difficult for government to make judgment whether there's overcapacity or not. I think enterprises are in a much better position to make adjustment. And fluctuation is inevitable. You should not confuse micro-sectorial issue with the macroeconomic issues. So I think this is also a fundamental issue for Chinese government in making wrong judgment. When they see the falling prices for steel and steel products, then they draw a conclusion there's overcapacity, so we should cut overcapacity. But actually at time, China's price level are falling actually, inflation rate are falling. So at time, on the whole, you should not change your expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. So the third question I want to talk about is what should be the main driving force for economic growth? This is a very controversial issue at this moment, consumption or investment. According to, say, Summers and Krugman, China's growth pattern is fundamentally wrong because they rely on too much investment rather on consumption. So this is also a very popular view in China. Everybody is saying that China should increase consumption, China should reduce its investment. I think there's some truth in this argument, but we need to analyze the issue more carefully. I think we have to make some correction. For many people, China's household disposable income to GDP ratio is very low, lower than something like just 40%. This is a popular view, and also the view of most Chinese economists. But I talked with the people from Statistical Bureau. I was told actually there are two sets of statistics. That's low household consumption over GDP ratio is from household survey. They pay visit to different households. They get the figures. Another set of statistics is based on flow of fund table. Flow of fund table's result is China's household disposable income to GDP ratio is something like 60%. It's much higher than the result based on household investigation. And household investigation is not that reliable, which is twice underestimating household consumption. Because you go to a family, rich people's family, they will not tell you the true income. They will underreport their income. So your statistics based on that kind of a survey is biased in underestimating household consumption. So I believe another set of statistics is something like 60%. It's still low, but not that low as people thought. I think this is one thing I want to mention. And make comparison. Japan's disposable income over GDP ratio is 56%. Denmark is 46%. UK is 61%, so on and so forth. China, according to another set of statistics, is larger than 61%. So it's not that low if you compare with other countries. As another side of a coin, if household consumption to GDP ratio is very low, then the government revenue to GDP ratio must be very high. Okay, so actually China's government revenue to GDP ratio is among the lowest in the world. These are some figures. It's not, you cannot add up. Either government's revenue over GDP ratio is very high, household disposable consumption very low, or other way around. You cannot have both Chinese government's revenue over GDP ratio and household disposable income over GDP both low. It's impossible. Okay, so statistic in China is not that reliable. You need to analyze more carefully. So this is some comparison I will not repeat it due to time constraint. It's China's consumption over GDP ratio. Oh, that's another concept, not household disposable over GDP ratio. That's China's consumption to GDP ratio. On the service, you make comparison with the United States, it's much lower. In the United States, more than 80%. In China, it's just more than 50%. Make comparison, yes, it's very low compared with the United States. But the trick is that the structure of consumption between the United States and China are very different. In the United States, consumption, service consumption actually account two-thirds of consumption, two-thirds. They spend money on hiring a lawyer to sue somebody, nannies and so on and so forth. And the price of those service consumption is extremely high in the United States. In China, it's very low. When I was studying in UK, I never went to barber to have my hair cut. Okay, too expensive. Okay, but in China, it's okay. I can hire a nanny. I hire a cleaner and so on and so forth. When I was in UK, once I meet, actually I stay in my son's home. One day I saw eight workers to mend something in my son's home. I was frightened how much money we have to pay for that. And so on and so forth. And to hire cleaner is also terrible. Just 1 or 2 hours. Then suddenly 2 cleaners to come up small houses to help you to clean. And they charge very high prices. So if you take all this kind of into account, China's consumption of GDP ratio is not that low. And also you compare China's consumption of consumer goods over GDP ratio compared with the United States, China's share is higher than the United States. I did this calculation myself. It's 1.25 times higher than the United States. We buy things. We don't hire other people to help us. We can do that. Homework we can do ourselves. I think this kind of Chinese tradition, right? So this kind of superficial comparison, just based on statistics, is sometimes misleading. You must be very careful. These are some figures. That another side of the coin, is China's saving rate too high? Yes, it's rather high. But compared with Singapore, I think it's not that high. According to World Bank, Singapore's saving rate is 60%. 60%. China is more or less than that. Sometimes I think it's lower. Especially among young people, they have changed their mind. They don't want to work hard. They don't want to save. They want to lie down. They spend money. I think this world trend, actually in this regard, China is converging with the rest of the world. So China's saving rate is not that high. Okay, so how about China's investment? Is China invest too much? Yes, I think before 2012, China invests too much compared with other countries, because China wants to use investment to drive the economic growth, to compensate the slowdown in the growth of consumption. But since then, China's growth rate in investment has been falling steadily. Actually, in later 2012, when China started to tighten its policy, in 1 month, the growth rate is something like zero. Last year, China's growth rate of investment is just 3%. So since 2017, contribution by investment to GDP ratio is smaller than consumption. So it's not a main driver of China's economic growth anymore. Okay, remember last year, China's growth rate of investment just 3%. 3% is very low. China's growth rate of GDP last year is 5.2%, much lower than GDP growth. And also, as a result, China's investment over GDP ratio, the share of GDP, the share of investment in GDP has been also falling. The fall is not dramatic because the GDP growth has fallen very dramatically. Okay, even though last year China's investment growth rate is just 3%, but its GDP growth rate also low. So the share even low, the share lower, but it's not that obvious. But we should remember that China's investment rate has been falling. That is a simple factor. So what should be China's main driver of economic growth? I think in the longer run, we can consider whether China should further adjust the share of investment in GDP to allow the share to be lower. We can discuss the issue. Actually, in 2012 and 2011, I met with the Chinese President Hu Jintao. We were invited by him to talk about this. At the time, I argued that China should lower its growth rate of investment vis-a-vis growth rate of GDP, so that we increase the share consumption. But after more than 10 years, situation has changed and also changed quite dramatically. And put aside the long-term perspective, whether in the long run, what should be the most appropriate share of investment in GDP, what should be the right growth rate of investment is another issue. But in the short run, because China is facing deflation, okay, and when the economy is suffering from quasi deflation or deflation, it's difficult to persuade the people to spend more, to increase consumption. They have to save, right? They save more. Actually, China's saving deposit over the past few years has been increased, even though the government tried to persuade people to spend more on consumption. So in this kind of a situation, to allow the economy to have a high growth rate is more important, because we know consumption is a function of income. Consumption of income is expectation and wealth. Okay, so in order to increase consumption, you first to increase income to increase GDP. How to jumpstart the growth rate of GDP? The only alternative in China at this moment is investment in infrastructure. We don't have a better way. If we invest in infrastructure, then we can promote economic growth, and household increase their incomes, then they may spend more, and so on and so forth. I think at this stage, we don't have much better alternative. So the fourth question is whether China can achieve its growth rate target of 5% for this year. And my answer is yes, but you need to figure out very carefully. You should do calculation. You shouldn't just talk very abstractively, very generally, because the Chinese people are hardworking, because we have wise leaders, and so that we can achieve this objective. That's nonsense. Usually, okay. You have to do specific analysis. You can use different techniques and from different perspectives. So very simple way is to calculate China's, I mean, you have to divide this aggregate demand into different components, right? Everybody knows investment, consumption, government expenditure, and net export. Then you know the share of these kind of components. Then you assume this year, what will be the growth rate of these components. Then you add up, then you see, you can check whether China can achieve the growth rate of 5%. This is calculation by KKR. According to KKR calculation, and here, I will not repeat, they analyze which components can make contribution. This is not from the side of aggregate demand. This is from the side of production. Okay, digitalization can contribute 3 to 3.3%, and green transportation 1.7%, so on and so forth. I don't know how they did the calculation. We cannot get the right figures on this. I mean, information is not available, but they are very clever. Maybe they have some agent that they correct these figures. They come up with 4.7%. Believe or not, but I think the methodology is correct. Okay, you have to come out with this kind of analysis. You add them up. So I did the easy one, that is to analyze the shares of each component, aggregate components, and assume what kind of a growth rate they can achieve this year, then add them up. And due to time constraint, I will not elaborate. I will leave this to you. You can do your analysis. The key point is that last year, China's growth rate of consumption is more than 8%. Okay, the contribution of consumption to GDP growth rate is 82%. Okay, so last year's 5.2% growth rate come mainly from increase in consumption. But you know that the base effect, because the year before last year, consumption growth rate is very low. So with a very low base, so to have 8% is not that big deal. But this year is not very likely, right? And so last year's growth rate of consumption is something like 8%. This year, I can assume rationally is something like 5%, but actually so far it's 5%. I make this assumption early this year without checking those figures, but it turned out my estimation, my expectation is more or less correct. So this is very fundamental because consumption occupies the biggest share of GDP. And this year, consumption will be something like 5%, if you believe me. Then the growth rate, I mean, the contribution of consumption GDP growth rate will fall. And also this year, we also know that the China real estate development is still in a very bad shape. In 2020, the growth rate is -10. Last year's -9.6. So far, this also more than -9.8, something like that. Worse, even a little bit worse than last year, or similar like last year. So with these two very important contributors to GDP growth in a poor shape, then you have to try to increase the contribution of other components. Export. I don't think export will make a very big contribution. It will make big trouble for China also. So we have to rely on investment. Among the investment, as I already mentioned, growth in real estate development will be quite low. So we have to rely on more, still the old story, infrastructure investment. Unfortunately, even though we don't like it, but we don't have better alternative. I mean, in short run, in order to achieve this 5% growth target, you have a significantly high growth rate in infrastructure investment. So I did some calculation. Okay, due to time constraint, I will not elaborate. My basic rough estimation is that in this year, the growth rate for infrastructure investment should be more than 10%, more than 10%. Otherwise, you cannot compensate the slowing down or the negative growth of other components of China's aggregate demand. This is my basic conclusion. I try to figure out this and add up this. This is very simple, simple mathematics. The most difficult thing is to find the right statistics. To be honest, I raised lots of questions to China's Statistical Bureau. They change, adjust their figures all the time. Last year, for example, last year the total investment say is 50 trillion, right? Last year, say, and last year, and this year, and no, sorry, the year before last year, if my memory does not fail me, is something like 47 trillion investment, 57 trillion. And then last year's 50 trillion. Last year's level of investment is lower than the year before last year. But last year's growth rate is something like 3%. How come? But they told me that they make adjustment. They lower the level of the year before last year. But if you change this kind of thing constantly, how come do calculation? But anyway, we try our best. Okay, so my conclusion still this year, China need to have a growth rate something like 10%, more than 10% in infrastructure investment. Okay, then the second question is whether we have enough money to finance this kind of investment. This is a very big problem. Then I check China's budget for this year. And due to time constraint, I cannot elaborate. But the result is that, according to my calculation, it's not enough, not enough. Here, I think, okay. I think I should enter into the fifth question. Is China's fiscal monetary policy in 2024 expansionary enough? My conclusion is not enough. Even though this year's fiscal policy is significantly more expansionary than last year. You see this kind of comparison. Actually, according to figure published by Minister of Finance, China's augmented deficit, fiscal deficit, is more than 11 trillion RMB. It's rather high. It's rather high. But still, compared with China's need for financing investment in infrastructure so that China can achieve the growth rate of 5%, is still not enough. I did some calculation how much money we can get from the budget to finance this investment in infrastructure. But the result is that the gap is still quite big, quite big. You see here just some example. It is known that 4.9 trillion yuan special bonds will be issued. Recently, people are talking about the 1 trillion super long government special bonds. You add all these kind of together, just less than 5 trillion. Then you add some other items together. I think it's just something like 10 trillion RMB, something like 10 to 3. It's difficult to calculate. According to most people, something like 8 to 10 trillion RMB Chinese economy can get from the budget. But as I mentioned, in order to finance the infrastructure investment, we need more than 10 trillion RMB. So there's still gap. So my conclusion is that perhaps the government needs to issue more bonds this year. If you want to issue more bonds, if there's some problem in the market, people will not accept, people will not buy. But so far, the news is good. Commercial banks want to buy. If we have program, then definitely China should ask People's Bank of China to intervene. So we may introduce sort of a QE in Chinese characteristic. Okay, this is possible. How about the monetary policy? Monetary policy is expansionary this year, but because China's situation, quasi-deflation, in this kind of situation, you cannot push a string. So this is the problem. You see this figure is very interesting. M2 is increasing quite significantly, but M1 is not increased very significantly. very low actually. So you see this gap between M1 and M2, which shows Chinese monetary policy is not that effective. You make comparison with the United States. When U.S. economy is in a sort of a deflationary situation, the gap between M2 and M1 is also very big. But since 2020, March 2020, when Federal Reserve expand the balance table dramatically, they buy huge amount of government bonds, and I think their balance sheet increased from 4 trillion to something like 8.9 trillion, dramatic rise. They stimulate the economy quite successfully. Demand in consumption, investment increased dramatically. So you see the gap between M2 and M1 shrink dramatically. M2 consists mostly 90%, more than 90% actually M1. But in China, the situation is just opposite. It shows that in China, you use expansionary monetary policy will not be very successful. This is in line with the argument made by Keynes during deflation, because liquidity trap, monetary policy just can play certain supportive role. And so this is China's reserve requirement. It's still high. And people argue that we should lower this reserve requirement. Yes, but whether that's useful, I don't think so. In the United States, the reserve ratio is 0, no requirement. But the excessive reserve is so big. In China, it's the same is true. If you can't if banks cannot find right project, they will not lend. And on the other hand, enterprises will not borrow. They don't see there's any project worth to invest. So monetary policy alone is incompetent. So this is what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that China need to use a more expansionary fiscal policy. Government need to issue more bonds, and so that monetary policy can play the supportive role to promote economic growth in China. Actually, at this moment, commercial banks are facing some problems. What's the problem? People argue that Chinese commercial banks should lower their interest rate on credit. That is right. But in order to lower the interest rate on credit, you need to lower the interest rate on deposit, right? Otherwise, bank will go bankrupt. But the trouble is you cannot lower interest on deposit anymore. One is a social problem. Poor people in China still, save quite a lot. They put the money in banks. They already suffering income losses. You further lower their deposit interest rate. There could be some problem. This one thing. Technically, there's another problem, because in China, commercial banks also make contribution directly to GDP growth because they provide a service, right? And all the banks actually are competing to attract deposit. If you attract more deposit, you make more contribution to GDP growth. You'll be awarded by attract more deposit. So actually they compete, even though it's not allowed by People's Bank of China to increase interest rate on deposit. But on the table, they compensate depositors so that actually they cannot really lower real interest rate of deposit. So this is a very hard constraint for commercial banks to lower interest rate on their loans so that they can help enterprise to invest more. So these are serious problems. But anyway, Chinese government's policy, in my view, since 2023, the direction is correct. They realize the importance of using expansionary fiscal and monetary policy. they realized that China's problem is not overcapacity. China's problem is lack of aggregate demand. First time in 2003, they raised this proposition. So the basic direction is correct, but my view is that it's not expansionary enough. They need to take bolder action. Otherwise, it's difficult to achieve the goal of 5% of GDP growth for this year. I don't know whether maybe the time is up, okay? But anyway, I just mentioned a few, actually, I still have two questions to address. One is real estate development. Another is local government debts. And basically, the situation is not changed fundamentally in China's real estate sector. My personal view is that China has built too many houses. And in China, here's the figure. In China, we have 2,777 skyscrapers. This is something very amazing. Actually, I raised this question in 2013. I wrote an article. We have built too much of these high buildings, too many houses, and so on. Also, China's home ownership is more than 90%. And when I was director of my institute, I was I was in charge of sort of allocation of houses. And that is, there was a very strict rule. If your wife has a house, then you are not eligible to have a house from my institute. Other way around is also correct. After this kind of housing reform, I found that almost every members have two houses. The wife got one, they got one, have two. I thought I was cheated, but that's the reality. So in Beijing, most family has more than two houses, smaller or bigger. And recently, I traveled a lot in the third and the fourth cities, some counties. Each county, small county, with a population less than 1 million, or each county, they're building, I think, comparable with the European, not the capital cities, but only provincial cities. And I travel in Japan a lot, 50 times. I compare the buildings in China and in Japan. I think that China's building is much better and much more than in Japan. Japan's actually, even they have so-called housing bubbles and so on. If China's bubble, the bubble is much bigger than in Japan. But be careful. I never say that China has a housing bubble, because the demand for houses are very strong. And also people pay. I mean, China's mortgage is not a big problem at this stage. And the default from mortgages is very limited in China, not big deal. The trouble is because you have built so many houses, and among those houses, a very big proportion is for speculation, and also for as a sort of investment in capital investment. Okay, and so not just for living, this is a problem. And why this is the case to a very large extent is because China's tax system. In China, there isn't a property tax. In China, there isn't an inheritance tax. In China, there's no capital gain tax. No. So houses are very good instrument for speculation, for store of value to prevent inflation. So this is a very important motivation for people to buy houses. This is a very fundamental reason why China has built so many houses. And also, Chinese want to learn from the United States and other countries, also learn from Singapore. Now, I think China is comparable with Singapore in terms of housing building, compared to the Pudong, Shanghai, second-tier cities. They have the building like here in Singapore. Almost all second-tier cities, capital cities for province, like Singapore, really. And I was amazed. It's very amazing. We have built so many. So we need to be punished. So there should be fall in houses prices, housing prices. Actually, I want to buy one recently. Anyway, so we build many. So I think in near future, there's some, there should be a long period of time. Housing price is not very good. And the investment in houses, the growth rate very low, if not negative. But I'm not sure whether there will be sort of a crisis because China is a very special country. China can muddle through for whatever difficulties. And for example, now there are some new policies just recently, policies that state-owned enterprises are encouraged to buy houses and sold houses. And then they reform, they make some adjustment to lend these houses to younger people. And in the future, these houses can be sold. And the People's Bank of China will provide money to those state-owned enterprises. They are buying houses from real estate developers. They are facing bankrupt. Okay, so in this way, perhaps we can help to stabilize. But whether it will be successful, I'm not quite sure because the money needed is very, very big. This is one measure. Another measure, in terms of, legally, lots of Chinese real estate developers already went bankrupt, but they are not allowed to be bankrupt. Okay, they still there. And creditors are persuaded to change the conditions to allow them survive, to allow them to complete the construction so that the houses already sold, prepaid, can be completed. Otherwise, ordinary people will be very angry. They will cause problems. So there are lots of ways to deal with this kind of problem. China's institutional arrangement may be not that effective in terms of increasing efficiency, but it's very effective in preventing crisis. So far, we haven't really encountered any big crisis in China yet. I entered into Chinese Academy of Social Science later 1970s. When I was young, I tend to predict disaster coming all the time, but neither happened. So I disappointed, I changed my position. I said there will be no crisis and so on since middle of the 90s. Since then, I'm right all the time until right now. Okay, and this is China's non-performing loans. Actually, it's okay. And the problem in real estate development will not create such big trouble for China's commercial banks like in other countries, because China learned something from Japan and the United States prepared. Okay, basically we have three three fronts to solve the real estate problem and also local government's problem. This is assets liability table. On the one hand, in assets side, Chinese government can use all ways, very many means to try to stop the further fall of housing prices. As I just mentioned, you buy houses and so on. So you inject money to prevent the fall of price of assets. On the liability side, you inject liquidities. For example, we have a so-called white list, and commercial banks are allowed to lend money to those real estate developers. They are in the white list. And also we can use sort of nationalization. We state-owned enterprise inject money or government or state-owned enterprise to inject money to take over those real estate developers. So on the whole, we have three basic directions to help to stabilize the situation. And lastly, a few words about these local government debts. Why there's local government debts? There are many reasons. Here, basically, I think there is four. Local government's responsibility for conducting infrastructure investment is very, very heavy. because central government has no ability to organize this kind of investment in infrastructures. And I have an advisor to economic planning agency, we call State and Reform Commission, for 20 years. As you just mentioned, the staff members very limited, a few guys. How come they really in charge of select, supervise investment in infrastructure projects, hundreds of thousands of projects? So they have to rely on local governments. And local governments has the ability and responsibility to raise money for this investment in infrastructures. I ask you a question, you can guess. What is the proportion of the financial contribution by central government from general budget, general public budget contribution from here to the finance of infrastructure investment? What is the share? During 4 trillion, government shares more than a fourth. Among these 4 trillion, central government contribution is 1.14 trillion. Okay, rather big. But in recent years, what is the proportion you can guess? Central government's contribution. What? Guess, 10%? Wrong. Higher or lower? Higher. Wrong. How? Guess again. 5. Wrong. Wrong. Not 0.1%. Not 1%. Not 0.1%. That's extremely low. You ask them to take all the responsibilities, but you are so mean to spend a nickel for this investment. So of course they have to rely on borrowing from commercial banks. And initially, the so-called local government debt, while this local government financial vehicle is just a few 100 million, yeah, more than 100 million. Now it's something like 10 trillion over these 10 years. You can see this. So this is the share. And local government has to rely on borrowing from capital market with a high interest rate. I think this is a very fundamental cause of why local governments are in big trouble. Here is a contribution of central government. You even kind of find where's this pie chart. Where's the portion of the central government? Because not 0.1%. This is the figure of 2021. Still very low. So you have to change this. So how to alleviate the debt service burden? There are lots of ways. I don't think I need to elaborate anymore. Anyway, low government debts this year, even though not reduced, still increasing. And the burden for servicing the debt is still very heavy. But it is not a hot topic anymore in China because there are lots of ways to calm them down. Okay, and you just roll over. I think this is not that difficult. So the key at this moment is real estate development. How to save those real estate developers. But while you are saving them to prevent a financial crisis from happening, some of those who commit crime, they create trouble should be punished. So how to find balance between preventing moral hazard and keeping economy going is a very big challenge Chinese government has to face. But so far we haven't found a perfect way to solve this issue. We're still trying. But I think I'm quite confident that there will be no financial crisis. Not like what Krugman said. China is teetering on the edge of a financial crisis. I think he will be wrong again. Okay, I think I should end here.
Thank you very much, which I thought was a fantastic presentation. And I think, as I indicated before, as a scholar, as an academic, looking at both the things that work, challenging conventional wisdom, whether it is within China or outside of China. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Maybe a few takeaways. I think the critical message at the very end was that China is not going to see a crisis, financial crisis, the likes that we have seen in Western countries, and I think there are many arguments to truly support that, apart from the history. But I think the ultimate question, and that's as you were elaborating on that concept, why China has enough space to contribute to maintain stability. In a certain kind of way, that undermined a little bit your argument that the growth rate can still be high, because you were highlighting that it can lead to a misallocation of resources. I think that's a big question. The other few takeaways is, and also what you read a lot within China and outside of China, is that issues such as aging is a factor that explains a lot of things. Again, these are long-term trends, and theoretically, we know what the population growth is. It is interesting, though, data not only from China might at times be surprising. Demographic data from the UN is quite surprising, because they suddenly made a major adjustment to their population growth that caused the debate in the public. But I thought one of the arguments that you made, and that might help us for the discussion, is to distinguish a little bit between the long-term trends and the forces behind that and the cyclical part. I think the long-term trend, you highlighted very clearly that this model that China has pursued, relying on real estate and in a certain kind of way linked to that on local governments, because they were part of this story, that model has come to the end of its life cycle and needs to be substituted with something else. Now, that is a maybe decades-long process that will also entail discovery, because while it's very clear what doesn't work anymore so well, it is not so clear where the true drivers are going to come from. There are broad directions, of course, including from the government articulated, but how this is all going to materialize, it's not so clear. The other one then is, so you have this big headway coming from the change in the growth model, and that has been recognized, and nobody wants to continue with the old growth model. That then comes with a lot of uncertainty, and I think you also highlighted there very nicely, that is impacting the short term, the cyclical part. Confidence is at an all-time low. Understandably, because if you take away what used to be an anchor, the old growth model, and you say there's going to be something different, but people don't really know what that means, the first reaction, I think, in any country of the world would be to increase savings and consume less, conceptually speaking. So therefore, I think your argument was, in order to manage this process, more support is needed. In your view, in particular, fiscal support is needed. Now, the question I have for you in this context is, if you look at the budget, and you also highlighted that, that is a significant stimulus this year, if you look at how we define the broader definition of the budget. If my numbers, our numbers are correct, I think this year would be about 9.4% of GDP.
More than that.
Even more than that. So we have to maybe correct our number, but our numbers are 9.4% of GDP fiscal deficit compared to 7.8. That will be a clear indication that there is support to the economy. The critical part, and that also relates to recent measures to support local governments, is the budget is one thing. Local government behavior is another one. And there is now this term that has been spreading rapidly. It's called debt control. So local governments are faced with this task to ensure that they are getting their house in order. And like in many other countries of the world, if you're a government official, you are very cautious in spending. So despite the fact that you might have a budget that is expansionary, despite the fact that you have $1 trillion in the bond issues, which is part of that. It's not so clear whether that ultimately will be spent, and so that could have adverse implications for growth. So at the end of the day, again, coming back to my question, it was a longer part. Do you think it is possible to instill the confidence that the public needs, that companies, local governments need, which will be critical to overcome the downward pressure, in the absence of providing a clearer definition of the relationship, the new relationship between the central and local governments that potentially is being questioned?
I think this question is beyond my area of study. Okay, this is very complicated. Actually, in my slide, there's one item, incentive for local governments, wrong incentive. And many years ago, this was an advantage in China. The competition between local government officials to compete for better performance, which was very good in promoting economic growth. But now the situation become more and more difficult. The incentive will need to be replaced. New incentive. For what purpose they should invest, how to cover the localities, whether just GDP growth, what else? I think that is really very important. Why I'm saying that when you travel in China, you see the the construction boom, lots of high buildings, even in third, fourth tier cities. You also can find lots of waste. Waste is very, very serious. In a very small county, I think it's county, Xiangyang. I see the station, high-speed train station, is incomparable in any other European countries. Much bigger in Paddington station, in Berlin, in Italy, and so on and so forth. That is something terrible. And also, we built so many government official buildings at the county level, 10 stores, 20 stores, and so on. Much luxury and magnificent than building in other countries. Compared with China, I just say they're shabby. So this is because of a wrong incentive. This is really a very serious problem. I agree. We have to solve this problem. But how to solve it is really a very difficult challenge. I'm also trying to find out what is the right way to solve this problem. So I cannot give you a ready answer, what should be done and so on. I don't know, to be honest.
No, thank you. I have 150 more questions, but the floor is open for questions here. Maybe we'll start out. Yes, Sarah?
Thank you, Professor Yu. Very insightful presentation and discussion. Two questions. Number one, you mentioned that this year the government measures to help the real estate to prevent crisis. Question is, what does that do to the overall growth? What kind of money focusing on preventing crisis? But does it have any sort of negative implications on the overall economy? Question number one. Question number two, expert like you, how do experts, scholars able to affect or to have some contribution to the policy process in China, especially in recent years? And that would be a very important question for us. When we think like policy changes or shifting are necessary, who are the ones who can push for that reorientation and people like you, how much contribution you can do and through what channel. Thank you.
The second question first. I think this is easy or difficult question for me. And I have experience of advising government for a long time. And to say 10 years ago, I meet with the leadership regularly because I'm the director of the Institute for Economics and Politics. And each meeting, because the leadership wants to talk about the international environment. So I have more opportunities than others because whatever topic is on Chinese economy, we have to talk about the international economy. So I attend. Chinese leadership is really very modest. They listen very carefully. And I attend other conference meetings in other countries. For example, I went to Downing Street to attend a meeting chaired by Gordon Brown. I meet with Macron, not Macron, sorry, Sarkozy, and attending their conference. Then make comparison. I think the Chinese leaders are more keen on learning, not like, for example, in Downing Street. I think Mr. Gordon Brown didn't have a clear idea what topics we are going to talk in the meeting with the Sarkozy, and they invite people like speakers and so on, a big group, and he used 90% of the time to talk himself. we are supposed to be invited to give advice. So I think they are very modest in this and so on. The trouble is Chinese scholars has too many different views. So it's difficult for them to make decisions. So they depend on their own judgment. And so there's a tendency that is they try their best to combine different views to make compromise. Sometimes I ask them why you are trying to compromise all these kind of different views to form a sort of in between policy. This is sort of a Chinese philosophy. In between policy is not the best, but it's safest. Okay, so I think still perhaps this is sort of a tendency. So scholars, the role of scholars, I don't know, because over the past 10 years, because I'm a retiree, I didn't attend this kind of a high-level meeting. No, so I don't know. I think the latest one is in 2019. I was called by Dr. Chiang to give my view on China's macroeconomic policy. I repeat those points I just mentioned, but I don't know whether he agreed or not. But I said we don't need to care too much about 3%. We should increase China's budget deficit to GDP ratio because Maastricht fiscal rule is decided at the time for the sake of the constrained South European countries, because I mean, Greeks and Italians, they want to spend and so on and so forth. And also because at the time they assumed that nominal growth rate of European countries would be 5%. And they have their calculation, their specific conditions. In China, we should not stick to this 3%. But by the end of March, after this the two Congress, right? And he's decided still 3%. So I don't think my advice has any influence on his decision. But I think we still can play a certain role. The trouble is that there are two different views. Some are very political. So, I mean, lack of professionalism is Chinese scholars' fault. So we shouldn't just blame leadership. We are making wrong decisions and so on. Actually, many wrong decisions are supposed by ourselves. So everybody should take blame. But the trouble for us at this moment is to say the truth. To think this right, then to speak out, and not for any other purpose. I think this is very important. This is the only thing we can do. Whether they will accept or not, I don't know. Okay. And the first question is about the government's policy on real estate development, whether this policy will hamper the growth target. Okay, I think this is a two-side story. On the other hand, you have to in order to save those, to stabilize the real estate market, you have lots of measures. But for any measures, you need money. Can't have to spend money. So when I'm talking about the expansionary fiscal policy, I even mentioned that in order to support investment infrastructure, government should perhaps raise more money and so on and so forth. So if you raise money for that, then you cannot have more money to save those real estate developers. So you even need to have more money. So definitely there's some contradictions. So perhaps if the situation in real estate real estate sector, then perhaps China should allow a lower growth rate. We don't have other alternatives. We don't have enough money. And I mean, we also should learn the experience of the United States in 2020. Not much. They certainly increased they lowered they returned to a zero interest rate in March 2020, and they expand their balance sheet dramatically. Then later there's inflation. So inflation, the possibility you cannot rule out. So why I'm saying that, because China's low interest rate, we should really use expansionary fiscal monetary policy. But I should not, actually I should mention this. We should not forget the danger and hovering behind the inflation. It's entirely possible. If you stabilize cost, then inflation can shoot up. And also inflation not only from demand side, there are also a possibility that there is external shocks. If due to external shocks and other shocks, inflation rate shoot up, then Chinese government will face dilemma. You cannot use expansionary fiscal monetary policy without suffering from inflation. If you don't want to suffer inflation, which Chinese people hate very much, then you have to slow down the growth rate. So that will be a very difficult situation. So I always emphasize the importance of seize the opportunity. This window opportunity come close very soon. And so this really is a very big challenge.
Very, very good. Thank you. Yeah. 1, 2. Can you just state your name and your affiliation? It is good to get a mic, though. If not, then do we have a mic? Because otherwise,
right.
There you go.
Oh, it's working, right? Thank you so much for the detailed elaboration. Also, the very interesting angle. So I'm from Morgan Stanley Equity Research Team, and then I work on the regional strategy team. So we are really interested in your view on how to quantify because there was a new real estate package announced on Friday, and then how does it compare to the access housing in China? And then how do we, is it enough to tackle the problem, and how much of a gap we still have right now? I still have several other questions, but I would just probably save the time for other people.
Could you repeat your question in a very
because
precise?
just now you also mentioned the SOE, like buying of real estate properties that was just announced on Friday. So how do we compare that to the access housing supply in China? Like, how do we quantify that? And then how do we quantify the gap between the package and then versus the access supply?
I think it's difficult for me to quantify, but it's very obvious. So far, People's Bank of China promised something like 300 billion yuan to support state-owned enterprise to buy houses. According to most economic analysis, actually, there are a lot of investment banks in China and security companies, they did the calculation. They said this is far from enough, far from enough. In order to buy those unsold houses, we need much more money, more than 1 trillion or even 2 trillion. So I didn't do the calculation, but that is very obvious. That is far from enough. So perhaps this is just one of the measures. I was told that People's Bank of China has tried this in other, in some places last year already, because this is very good for Chinese leadership. Whenever they want to introduce some new policies, they do some experiment in a very small scale. This is quite successful in some locality, but if you extend this to the whole country, the money is the biggest challenge. So I think somebody has to bear some costs. You speculate, you try to invest to houses. Now you make mistake, you should have lost money. I think we need to strike a balance. Each one should have a fair share. For me, I would not agree that you spend a huge amount of money to save those, housing market, because it's not for mine. I didn't speculate. I didn't buy houses. Why should I put a deal? But this is also problematic because for the Japanese experience, because they fear the public reaction, they are hesitating to rescue. They cause huge problem. They cause a financial crisis. They cause a bigger problem. So to strike a balance is extremely important. You must be very specific. Now Chinese government are using many different ways there and here to try to solve the problems. So let's see. We cannot, draw any conclusion yet.
And maybe just to kind of add, I think this is sort of like an example where so like Western economics and the way China manages these things are quite different. You mentioned, for example, the role of the PBC to provide the support to SOEs, probably because of the assumption that lowering interest rates for whatever reason is more challenging and maybe not as effective, but this is one way of monetary policy easing through the back door by providing support through the SOEs. Yes, in the back and then here. Yep.
Prof, thank you for your great lecture. I'm Paul. I'm MPA fellow at the Congyou School, and I also had a very valuable studying experience in University of Chinese Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. So it's my great honor to listen to you lecture here. And my question is, I've been living in Beijing for 30 years. I'm now seeing kind of script is unfolded in China. It's like, on the one hand, the non-government managed goods and service prices are going down, while the government managed public goods and services prices are going up. Like the life essentials, like the electricity, the gas, and the government is now buying the houses, and we could predict that in the coming years, the rent will be also going up. So my question is, we don't have the question about whether China will achieve the growth rate, but could you make some comments on, in such a process, the Chinese government achieving the GDP growth rate, the portion of the so-called market economy is a kind of progression or regression?
Sorry, what?
In such a background of government managed inflation, we can say that. Okay, do you think it is kind of progression of market economy or regression of market economy?
So if I can maybe rephrase your question, I think the question that you're asking is, in this process, is the size of the government and government intervention getting bigger, right? Is that the question?
I think my question is, the government decided prices is going up, while the prices that cannot be decided by the government solely is going down. So now I think the script in the Chinese government's hand is to drive up the life essential goods, the prices of the life essential goods and the services. So to reduce the deflation and to stimulate the kind of inflation. It's a very obvious trend.
You are saying that the Chinese government is using some artificial ways to raise prices, right? I don't think this is a government policy. Perhaps certain state-owned enterprises they want to get a higher profit, and so they raise their the price of their products. These kind of things happen, but I don't think that is sort of a government policy. That kind of policy, if it's the policy, this is definitely wrong, right? Inflation, you cannot create inflation artificially, right? We shouldn't do that, okay? And we should promote economic growth to increase demand. Then the increase in demand, of course, will lead to higher prices. This is the counter-deflationary measures. That is correct. I don't think the government has this kind of really the policy. That's stupid and wrong. But I cannot rule out the possibilities. For example, in Chongqing, some corporates are charging higher fees for using water, electricity, and so on. So I think they have been sued by citizens. They are really suffering from very bad reputation damage of those companies. So I don't think that will be happening, right? And as for real estate developers, I think, yes, government's intervention is really try to stabilize the prices, right? But I think this is different from sort of artificially create inflation. That's sort of a practice, I think, used by most countries when you see the price of assets fall, and which may lead to financial crisis. Then the government has to do something to stabilize the price, but not directly, right? You are buying houses, it's not the same as raising the prices of houses. That's different, right? This kind of intervention is legitimate. It has nothing to do whether the government is trying to expand its role in intervention. That's totally different. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe what we could do is we could take 2 questions at a time. Number 1, was there somebody here on the other side that I missed? 2.
And then you have to help me to remember the question.
Oh, okay, okay. You're in charge. We can also do one, so please go ahead. We're extending a little bit because I think we have a unique opportunity. So we'll extend the meeting alone.
Thank you for giving me the chance. So my name is Yoren Tian. I'm a journalist with the Singapore English language newspaper, Straits Times. So Taiwan's President William Lai inaugurates today.
Sorry, what?
Taiwan President Lai Ching-te, his inauguration is today. Yeah. So I hope you can entertain a question related to Taiwan. In the event of a military conflict.
If I could maybe interrupt, I think we should really focus on the questions related to economic growth, which is the expertise of Yu Yongding. So I don't know whether this is the place to discuss.
I don't care, actually. I don't care.
No.
What economic impact in the event of a military conflict? I wonder if you've done any research on that.
I leave this up to you, but I think this goes beyond the context of our discussions here.
Okay.
We might have a separate event on this, but let's focus on China's economic policy. It's already difficult enough. Do you have any other questions?
Can I just follow up with the questions from the previous 2 persons? So some commentators argue that the economic slowdown can be reversed if only the leadership reverse its current policy of heavy reliance on state and state-owned enterprise and mistrusting the private sector. Do you agree? The 国进民退 strategy. Is it if it reversed, then will there be economic growth? Thank you.
I think this is sort of a generalist views on China's economic policy. You should notice that I talk about China's macroeconomic policy from economic point of view, and you can talk lots of other things. For example, China's cultural tradition, China's political system, China's relationship with other countries, so on and so forth. You can quote lots of factors which may have an impact on China's economic growth. But I think for me, the relevant problem is whether China's slowdown is decided by some fundamental factors, which means that this slowdown, say from 10% to 5%, is inevitable, or this is to a very large extent is related with the policies. or these are the combination of these two factors, long-term and short-term and so on. I think you also make a point. I agree with this point that we have to take both into consideration. When you ask me why this slowdown, then I can use this long-term factor to explain. When you ask why the growth rate is 5% or 6% and this sort of thing, then I have to analyze the policies, specific policies, very specifically. And so I add up each component's growth rate and the shares and so I can give you some direct answers. So this is way of economists thinking, not the generalist thinking. You tend to talk about the general things. It's okay, it's right, but you cannot answer the specific questions.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Yu, for your very insightful sharing. Yusen Ho from the Lee Kuan Yew School MIA program. So you mentioned about the ineffectiveness of China's monetary policy. And remember, there's a chart you also showed the gap between M1 and M2.
Yeah.
When you look at M2, actually, indeed, in the past 8 years, since 2016 to today, actually there was an exponential growth of M2. Last month, it just passed 300 trillion RMB. So actually, there is a considerable amount of money in the market. But meanwhile, several economists have been arguing in recent years. One, and in the earlier days, a lot of the liquidity injected into the market, they did not really impact real economy. Instead, they most stayed in the fictitious economy, which drove up the asset bubbles in China. And in most recent years, you start to see also the injected liquidity increasingly stayed in the financial system, the banking system. So they staying idling without actually impacting the economy. So in your view, my question is, what needs to be changed to make that expansionary monetary policy more effective? Thank you.
Okay, I think this is the right question. And firstly, expanding of money supply very rapidly is a global phenomenon. And previously, we believe that whenever places inflation is a monetary phenomenon. So according to Friedman, price will follow the increase in money supply. But I think things has changed. We have to make some adjustment to this kind of theoretical views and policies. And in China, yes, People's Bank has quite supportive in terms of extended loans, credits, and so on and so forth. But yes, as you mentioned, much of this money failed to enter into real economy to support investment and consumption. This is because China is in a sort of a liquidity trap, and or we say is because the quasi-deflation and so on, because enterprises do not have a very strong desire to invest. And of course, households are very worried about their future income, so they save a lot. So the money stay in the financial sector, didn't really being used to promote economic growth. So to solve this problem, it's not to accuse so-called what is people in China call this overextending of loans, flat the market by People's Bank of China. I think this kind of accusation is not professional. It's wrong. What this reflects is that the incompetence of monetary policy. So this is why I emphasize the importance of fiscal policy time again. Without a strong fiscal policy, without we use investment in infrastructure investment to jumpstart the growth process, so that people's perspective may change, expectation may change. So, for example, if we invest really in infrastructures, it will create a crowding in effect. For example, if you dig dig some tunnels. Maybe it's wasteful, but you increase the demand from private entrepreneurs. You need they need to you need to buy cement, buy wires, buy lots of things, and so income will increase. Income increase, then people will change their perception and they will consume more. Then you increase income again. So we can form sort of a vicious circle. Then the demand for credit will increase. Then People's Bank of China can help. So at this stage, I think the most important thing for expansion of fiscal policy perhaps is not increase credit, it's lower the interest rate. I think this is very important. In lots of Western countries, I don't think they care too much about the increase in money supply. They didn't care about that. They care about the interest rate, lower the interest rate. So this is very important. But as I just mentioned, now even lower interest rate is not that effective. So we have to use expansion fiscal policy to lead the way. So what I'm trying to say is that at this stage, the lower interest rate will reduce the debt burden of enterprises is helpful. But whether it will help to promote economic growth is another question. So combination of expansion fiscal policy and monetary policy is most important. And I hope, and I'm quite sure now People's Bank of China and mutual finance now increase their cooperations. Mutual finance actually issue more bonds, and they call for People's Bank of China to buy more bonds from market. I think it is right. This is sort of a QE. I think China now is, moving forward along the right direction. The right direction. What I'm worried about is it's not forceful enough. I hope they can more bolder in using expansion fiscal policy combined by expansion monetary policy.
There was one question here.
Hi, Yu Laoshi. This is Josh from Bloomberg. I just have two simple questions. One is about a brief line that you mentioned just now about exports will not have a big contribution to this year's GDP, in that exports will face some trouble. So I was wondering, like, could you elaborate on that? Because for the past, for the data that we've seen so far, I think China's exports have been outperforming forecasts. So we're just wondering, like, what are some of your concerns with exports? And then my second question is about national unified market. We were sort of like sensing that this year has been a ramp up in terms of like focus.
Sorry, I didn't follow.
National unified market, 国家统一大市场. We're just wondering, like, this year seems like there has been a ramp up in terms of focus from the administration on the initiative. But just wondering, like, why now? Yeah, those are my two questions.
I didn't.
What is it? The National Unified Market?
Okay, yeah. 就国家统一大市场，然后sort of like eliminate domestic trade barriers, protectionism, sort of stuff.
Oh, reduce trade barriers?
Yeah, that is within China.
I think this is a problem which was serious before, but I think at this stage it's not that serious. We call local protectionism. This is a problem in China. But you mean we have a very strong central government at this stage? I don't think really this is really a very serious problem at this stage. This is my personal view.
With that, exports, the contribution of exports?
Last year, when we are talking about contribution, I think we can see from two different angles. One is for the long-term growth. Another is short-term. From long run, you increase your export, increase your import, and which will improve resource allocation, so on and so on. It's very good. But China's problem is that in the past, especially say around 2006 and so on and so forth, China's trade surplus is too big, and it caused problem, not only for the United States and other countries, but also for China itself. So the Chinese government proposed change for China's growth strategy. from export land for dual circulation. I think this is the right approach, but the thing is that we fail to implement this new strategy in a possible way. I think it's very natural because you have been exporting for a long time. You're familiar with the market, you can earn profit rather easily. If you really ship, you have to change a lot of things, the cost will be high. So because, I mean, perhaps lack of incentive and also lots of supportive policy are not available. So this change is very slow, very slow. So whether China can run a trade surplus depends on either foreign demand or domestic demand. When Chinese economy is in poor shape, growth rate is falling, then of course enterprises want to export. So import is a function of income, right? So this is an important factor. Then another is external demand, which is beyond China's control. And last year, the contribution of net export to China's GDP was negative. So this year, I think the situation will be better. So my expectation is very low, positive, maybe 1%. I make a very wide guess, but I don't know if that's right or wrong. But fundamentally, I have been holding the view very strongly that China should not pursue current account surplus. China may run current account deficit from time to time because we have accumulated too much US dollar denominated assets. And it's possible, certainly one day, if Trump was in the office, he can sequester China's foreign assets. Nobody can rule out this possibility. I remember Martin Wolf raised the issue in 2013, December, in the piece in Financial Times. He said if there's conflicts between US and China, and it's possible US will sequester a big portion of China's financial assets. I think that's very important. I remember that's in December 2013. I conveyed this message to Chinese leadership. So we should stop this kind of thing and to run current account surplus and accumulate foreign exchange reserves, so on and so forth. We made some adjustment. I think it's far from enough. I think perhaps this has something to do with inertia. People don't want to change. So China government need to do something more. Previously, I argued that we should allow MPE to appreciate so that it will give China trade surplus. But unfortunately, because the capital account deficit offset the current account surplus, so we can't use this as an instrument to reduce China's trade surplus. But I think there are some other areas we can do something. For example, tax rebate. A lot of local governments, they give a very large tax rebate to enterprises in their localities. That's totally wrong. Actually, we are helping Trump to impose higher tax on China's import because the burden of this tax will shift to China. If you don't provide this tax rebate, then Chinese exporters will not lower the prices. So if you impose higher taxes, then U.S. consumers will pay. So this will help China to really reduce its trade surplus. And so there are a lot of things perhaps we can think deeper. So to try to eliminate all those things which encourage undue export driver, so that to make China's trade account more balanced. For me, I think China better to buy more U.S. products if they can provide. So we can run trade surplus against the United States. We return those IOU back to the United States. That will be wiser.
Thank you very much for an enlightening discussion. I think you almost highlighted that we need to invite you back to continue the discussion on many aspects. Again, thank you very much for joining us today, and big thank you to Dr. Yu Yongding.
Thank you.